Welcome to the Buffalo Olmsted Parks Conservancy walking tour of Hoyt Lake and Ure Delaware Park. This is presented by M&T Bank, and I'm Jim Mendola, the volunteer historian for the Olmsted Parks. Where we're standing now is the oldest feature in any of the parks. This staircase, which was called City Gate, dates from 1874. At the other end of the park, there was Ledgewood Gate, a similar entrance, but that is long gone. Now, the top of these stairs, you can see the Albright Art Gallery with its magnificent renovation and addition. Before that was built, that was the Prospect Concourse, where you could pull a carriage up and look down the prospect of the whole lake. Up at the top of these stairs, Buffalo car manufacturers like to take their pictures to promote their products. Pierce Arrow did some advertising there. Playboy cars, which were made in Buffalo from 1946 to 49 as sort of a cheap car for the returning GIs to buy. Their symbol for the Playboy cars was a top hat, a cane, and white gloves. And Hugh Hefner, when he was thinking about doing a magazine, was attracted to that symbol, so he called his magazine Playboy, and that's where that came from. This corner of Hoyt Lake is probably the densest in history of any section that we're going to visit. It probably reflects on Calvert Vaux's work in the park. He did the boathouse, which is where the casino is now, and two boat shelters, which are over my shoulder. Both of these are long gone, and we'll give you a little bit of that history later on. Now, the boat story is the main thrust of this section of the park. Now, today we have the float bingos and some rowboats that echo the history of the boats in this section of the lake. Now, in the early 1870s, some of the first electric boats in the country gave tours on Hoyt Lake, which was then called Gala Water. They could go 8 miles an hour for 6 hours. And frankly, I've never run across how they recharged the batteries, but I assume it was a steam generator. Buffalo had its own Swan boats. Now, the problem with that is when they did the contract for the operation of Swan boats, the operator was also in charge of maintenance, which he neglected to do. They sprung leaks in their pontoons and dumped people into the lake. Now, no one drowned because the lake is only 5 foot deep, but with their heavy clothes and everything, it must have been a real mess. Now, a second time that happened, that same summer, the council canceled the operator's contract, so the Swan boats disappeared from Buffalo. The next kind of boat we can see out in the rowboats in the lake, they're reproductions of the water taxis that were in Buffalo Harbor. They had a notch in the back where you could scull your oar so that there would be more room for passengers and baggage to go back and forth between the boats in Buffalo Harbor. Now, these almost disappeared, but they found some old stereo views and old wreckage so that the Buffalo State Maritime Center could reproduce these boats. So when you come to the park, although you won't be sculling from the back, you'll see that notch in the back of the boat, and that's what it's from, these unique water taxis that only existed in Buffalo. In the 1890s, they built bandstands in the parks, and over my shoulder you can see the spot of land where the Delaware Park bandstand was. They would have different bands come into play, mainly the regimental band in Buffalo, the 65th and the 74th Armory bands, and even the, if you know today, the Shinta family is known for entertainment, but they did have a band at the turn of the century which also played in these bandstands. They would attract hundreds of people. They would have picnics and come out in their rowboats and canoes and just fill the park. Now, if you can picture this over my shoulder, that hill and that little corner of Hoyt Lake, in 1929 they had 6 concerts there, and the Philharmonic, which was then the Buffalo Civic Orchestra, played on a floating bandstand, a 3-tiered bandstand shaped like a shell, attracted over 20,000 people per concert. It was also the first international radio broadcast of a classical music concert went to South Africa, Australia, Europe. Unfortunately, the Depression in 1930 stopped these concerts, and so far I haven't run across a picture of the bandstand. It was very unusual and one of a kind. Behind me is the Bridge of the Three Americas that was built for the Pan American Exposition. It's got its name from the exposition interest in North, South, and Central America. Now, this is the third bridge at this location. The first one was designed by Calvert, Vaux and was entirely made of wood and was pretty hard to maintain, so that by 1890 they tore it down and constructed a cast iron bridge which had Victorian colors of yellow, brown, green, and red, and little balconies with benches that you could sit on and look out into the lake. By the time of the exposition, the organizers thought it was too old-fashioned, so they tore it down, and E.B. Green designed the Bridge of the Three Americas. Now, originally, it had lions at the entrances that were modeled after the lions in St. Mark's Square in Venice, except without the wings. People ask, how come the lions aren't still there? Like most of the Pan American Exposition, they were made out of plaster and not intended to last more than a few years. So after the exposition, they started to disintegrate and they were just taken down. Now, if you look underneath the bridge, you may see some swallows flying out of there. They're sort of our version of the swallows of Capistrano. They make their home there and raise their young under there. They always come the first week in May, and they always leave the last week in August. Over 40 years of looking at them, they always come those same times, come and go. They migrate to Central and South America, following the insects down the coast of North America so that they can feed before they fly over the Caribbean Sea. We're on the other side of the Bridge of the Three Americas to show you what Scajaquada Creek looks like now, but in past years there was a 10-acre lake there that you could boat to and have picnics on the ground. These disappeared when Buff State expanded and when the Scajaquada Expressway came into play, and they filled in the lake, and now it's one of those disappeared parts of the park. Here we are at the Statue of David in the old West Bluff concourse. The story behind the statue is that Andrew Langdon, another civic-minded Buffalo millionaire who made his money in coal and steel, went to the Paris Exposition in 1900, saw this statue and thought it would be great for Buffalo. So he had it shipped over, all 17 feet and 3,000 plus pounds, and planned to present it to the city. The problem was the city didn't want it. They were too tied up with the Pan Am preparations. So it sat in a warehouse for 3 years while Mr. Langdon was kind of schmoozing the city council to get them to accept it. In 1903, they did donate it to the Park Commission and erected the statue here in the old concourse. Now, if you look over my shoulder across the Scajaquada Expressway, you'll see a profile of Mozart in bronze. Now, that was donated by the German Singing Society. The societies in the 1890s, there were several singing societies in Buffalo, and they would donate the bust of their favorite composer.